Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and this is part 2 of my HD Foam Samurai Armor series. In part 1, I fabricated the Menpo, and in part 2, I'm going to make the rest of the Kabuto to go along with it. Now, both of these have free PDF files available over on my website that you can download in case you would like to make your own. And just like all the rest of my builds, these are both fabricated out of my HD foam, which you can pick up over at Blick Art Materials. And if you enjoy these videos, if you love the free PDF files, by all means, go through the links that are in the description section and those that are on my website, because every time you do, not only are you getting the best foam out there for building props and costumes, but you're continually supporting this channel, which means I get to continue to make awesome things like this, give you free files, and show you how to put it all together. So, I want to show you what it takes to put the rest of this helmet together and paint it. Let's go ahead and get started. To start this process, I'm going to take part A and transfer that onto some 6mm foam 4 times, making sure to mark where all these pieces are going to line up. To get a compound curve in the foam, I'm going to use the end of a bat to act as a foam anvil. I heat up the foam and I stretch it across the knob of the bat. This will allow these pieces to have a better dome shape. Weldwood contact cement is applied to all the edges, and then using my registration points, I can line all these pieces up and firmly press them together. After the two halves have been assembled, these can be glued together to create the dome of the helmet. Using a smooth sanding drum and the sanding sponge, I knock down the foam to diminish the seams. I'm going to cut out 2 strips of 2mm foam approximately 6 inches. These are going to be glued to the front and the back of the dome on the inside while the foam is curved. This will help the foam conform to this shape and fit my head better. Now I'm going to cut out parts B and C out of 6 and 4mm foam using a circle jig on my bandsaw. After the edges have been rounded over and cleaned up, I can glue part B to the top of the dome. Now I can cut out a bunch of strips out of 2mm foam. These are all approximately 1/4 of an inch wide. I'm going to start by hiding each one of the 4 seams on the dome using these strips. From here I'm going to segment this dome and add 4 more strips. 8 more strips can be added to the middle of each one of these sections for a total of 16 strips in all. These strips do a really good job giving additional detail to the top of the helmet while also getting rid of all the seams. With all the strips glued into place, now I can add the 4mm part C to the top of the dome. For an additional detail on the back of the helmet, part D is going to be traced and cut out of some 2mm foam. This is going to be marked and glued into place using some Bob Smith superglue. To give it a functional look, some 10mm faux rivets are going to be cut out of 2mm foam. Part E is going to make up the visor of the helmet, and this is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. Before I glue this to the dome, I want to outline this piece with a raised edge 2mm detail. With the strip in place, I can now take a smooth sanding drum, clean up all my cuts, and make everything flush. I have 2 small seams at the top, and I'm going to use some additional 2mm foam to make some ring details. These are going to look like an anchor point from the visor to the helmet, giving it a more authentic appearance. Part E can now be glued to the front of the helmet using some superglue. Just like the back of the helmet, some 5/32 faux rivets are glued to the brim. So at this point in the build, you have a little bit of a decision to make, and that's concerning the back half of the armor for this helmet. On my original prototype, I had used 4mm foam, just like I had used 4mm foam for the neck guard and 2mm foam to outline it for all the detailing. Now, because I'm not actually going to be wearing this costume, it is going to be specifically for display purposes, For my armor back here, I'm going to continue that using 4mm foam, 2mm details. Now, if you are going to be wearing your costume quite a bit, you're worried about overall durability, by all means, go ahead, switch that up, and use some 6mm foam for these back slats instead. Parts F, G, H, and I are all traced onto some 4mm foam, making sure to mark all of the lace points. These parts are cut out with a hobby knife, and I use a scribe to poke my way through the foam for the lace points. A little bit of heat is added to each piece so I can curve them to get the correct shape. Now to maintain this shape, I'm going to use part J, which is going to be traced and cut out of some 2mm foam 4 times. These are going to be glued to the backs of F, G, H, and I to help retain the curve. Just like the brim, additional strips of 2mm foam will be glued to the perimeter of each piece. The only exception will be the bottom of part I. Part K is going to be traced and cut out of some 2mm foam. This is going to be glued to the bottom of part I. I also make sure to mark all the lace points on this piece as well. Just like I had done in part 1, I'm going to be using a heat tool to open up all the holes for the laces. And always remember to wear your respirator when heating foam. I use a smooth sanding drum to clean up all of the edges, and I add some additional faux rivets to the sides, and the back panels are looking pretty good. Part L is going to make up an additional detail on the visor, and this is going to be traced and cut out of some 2mm foam. To attach the embellishment to the front of the helmet, I'm going to cut part M out of some 10mm foam. Part N is going to attach to this block, and it can be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. I make sure to add a little bit of heat just to give this piece a slight curve. Some super glue is added to the block, and now part N can be glued to the front of the helmet. To make up the armor flaps on the sides, I'm going to take part O and trace and cut that out of some 4mm foam 2 times. Now to make sure that these pieces have the same curve on both sides, I'm going to use a water bottle as a template. I wrap some 2mm foam around the bottle and then glue on part O. These 2 pieces will now always retain this curve, and it'll be the same for both sides. Any additional foam can now be trimmed away, and just like all the other armor pieces, strips of 2mm foam are placed around the perimeter. I don't use it very often, but I thought this would be a good opportunity to fire up the laser cutter for the embellishment details. Now I can use my smooth sanding drum to square up all the foam layers and round over the edges. The embellishment details can now be marked with a pencil and glued to either side. And of course, you don't have to use these, use any detail you'd like. To add some additional interest to the front of the helmet, part Q is going to be traced and cut out of some 2mm foam before being glued onto part N. Just like I had done for the Menpo and the neck armor, the tinfoil technique was added to all these pieces to give it a little bit of texture. Plasti Dip is going to be applied as my base layer, but I almost forgot that I wanted to take part F and attach that to the back of the helmet. Two more layers of Plasti Dip were applied before a dusting of Krylon red oxide. The painting process is going to be exactly the same as part 1, so I'm going to start by using some Liquitex Heavy Body Red Oxide. This pigment is going to be applied to all the armor pieces using a mop brush and no water. Some Liquitex cadmium-free red medium is added to the red oxide. This is going to act as a highlight layer. Some dark brown Dirty Down spray is applied to all the armor pieces and left to dry. And like I had mentioned in part 1, this is water activated, so I can take my mop brush and a damp paper towel and actually remove some of this pigment. This is going to give it a really nice weathered look while still allowing the colors that have already been applied to show through. I'm going to do a light dusting of a matte clear coat on all the armor to lock the Dirty Down sprays in. All of the armor's trim pieces and embellishments are going to be painted with some Golden Brand iridescent bronze. Now because this is a metallic, I want to minimize the amount of water used, and notice that I'm not completely covering it. I'm allowing some of that red to still show through. For the strips and the rivets at the top of the helmet, I'm going to paint these using some Liquitex Mars Black. This is giving off a really nice contrast to the other colors that we've already applied. As a highlight layer to the gold, I'm going to be using Utrecht brand iridescent gold. This paint is only applied in specific locations, giving the gold a decent variety. I'll once again be using the athletic laces that I picked up from Shoelace Express. The ends of the lace are heated and pressed to make them easier to go through the lacing holes. I'm going to be using the same lacing pattern that I had on part 1, where it's going to crisscross and go down. The laces will then enter and then crisscross into the next piece. Now for the lacing, I decided to work my way down the middle first, and then I worked my way to the outside edges. I could then go back and tighten certain layers to make the armor sit properly. Now I wanted the armor layers to sit a little bit closer together, so I ended up cutting some spacers and gluing those in between each piece. Now you couldn't see these from the front or the sides, but I really felt that it gave the armor a tighter look in the end. For the lacing on part K, I started at the ends and I worked my way to the middle. Once I had reached the middle, I cut off any excess, burned it, and then pressed it to keep it in place. With the back complete, I can now add the Part O flaps to either side of the helmet. These were traced around to make sure they were in the right spot, and then super glue was added to secure them into place. This took quite a while, but all the individual lacing in the end looks really nice. To secure the helmet to the mask, several strips of 4mm foam are going to be glued to the inside of the helmet. I'm going with some 7mm rope cord that I was able to locate at Michael's. I like this one because the material would take the aging spray. The rope can now be threaded through the loops that I had made using the 4mm foam. This is then crisscrossed to the opposite side, leaving a section of the rope that will go underneath my chin. The excess rope is then knotted across the chin, around the back of the neck, and then knotted again in the front. Just like part 1, the gold is looking a little too new, so I'm going to be using some Dirty Down Rust to age it. Just like the sprays, this is water activated, so I put down my initial coat. After that's been allowed to dry, I'll then go back in with a wet brush or a damp paper towel, feather the pigments, and move them around. Now you don't have to do this process, and it really just depends on how dirty you want your armor to appear. To knock the tarnished rust sections back a little bit, I'll go back in with some Utrecht brand iridescent gold. Now this pigment isn't as opaque, so I'm not covering up the rust, I'm just giving it a slight highlight. So you all can see the steps that I took to make my own custom samurai helmet and mask. And I absolutely love this build because I got to take a whole bunch of historical references and really make this my own. And I want you to do the exact same thing. Again, the PDFs for this are absolutely free. Download those, customize this build, and make it your own. And if you are building any of my builds or utilizing some HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKSProps on Twitter and Instagram because I want to see your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.